So I think a good way of addressing these Democrats is to get to the issue of violence, immediately. So what I'm noticing is a lot of them try to be evasive. Okay, they try to act threatening and intimidating, and like they'll try to be manipulative about, you know, the nature of their threats. So yeah, just focus on, look, these people are probably making threats towards you, and you need to bring that to light. They can get in legal trouble for it. So a lot of the times they speak very disrespectfully. Okay, they try to they try to trick you into speaking to them in a similar manner. Okay, even though you're just reciprocating what's been done to you, they're going to use that as an excuse to be violent towards you or to make accusations towards you. So, don't engage in that manner of speech, even though they initiate it, because it's a tactic. And bring the tactic to light. Be like, look, why are you talking to me that way? You see, they'll probably anticipate what's happening once you start doing that, and they'll just try to flee. When they notice that their tactics are being brought to light, they try to flee. So they try to intimidate, they try to gain territory, they try to commit their crimes, and then, when they feel like they're getting caught and exposed, they just flee. And so just try to bring the violence and the crime to light immediately. Don't because they just do a lot of filibusters and distractions and false accusations, mute points, just making all these claims and acting like there's some kind of injustices going on without explaining things. They provide false evidence, and they get caught, or they're not willing to allow people to look up these claims that they're making and stuff. And it's just a bunch of nonsense. Just focus on the violent aspect, because that's I understand people can have disagreements, but when there's violence over the issue, okay, it's obviously a more severe problem. And I'm not saying that violence isn't warranted in certain disagreements, such as fundamental disagreements, like somebody thinking that they have the right to, to kill whoever they want or something. That's something where you have to physically defend against some kind of tyrannical, very damaging injustice and stuff like that. Some kind of absolute savagery. Yeah, you have to be violent over those kinds of disagreements, but you also have to make room for disagreements to be had without violence, okay, for this democratic process, this democratic republic, process of lawmaking and government to actually take place over disagreements that aren't, so urgent that rebellion needs to be had and stuff like that. So identify them as rebellious, idiots. Identify their violent, intimidation tactics and their manipulative tactics, and just focus on that, because that's, a lot of the times they flee when they realize that they're being exposed as a violent criminal. When you start talking about their riots, when you start talking about their violence, so they start being provocative, right? They start making threats and stuff. They start being disrespectful. Just identify them as look, you're obviously trying to be violent here, okay? You're being manipulative. You're being violent. We're just going to focus on that, okay? Are you saying that you have some kind of right to rebel, against the government, against, what is your point here? Why are you being violent? Why are you trying to be intimidating? So just focus on that aspect, because that's really common amongst Democrats, is violent threats, this kind of intimidating nature that they try to use to get what they're trying to get. So, I'm sure you're aware of a lot of their talking points. They're obviously nonsensical. Okay, they just keep spinning you around in circles with that stuff, you know what I mean? They just keep throwing threats, and, it's stubborn people. A lot of the times they know that they're wrong, and they're just trying to gain something. So, just focus on their threatening nature, okay? They start cursing and stuff, be like, look, if I was to curse at you, would you try to fight me? Okay, and if you say yes, so are you trying to provoke me right now? Do you expect me to fight you? And if I were to fight you, would you fight back? Are you guilty of a crime right now? That kind of stuff. You're saying these horribly disrespectful things towards me. If I were to say the same to you, would you try to be violent towards me? Okay, would you expect me to be violent towards you for the things that you're saying to me? So, meaning that you're provoking me right now. You know what I mean? So, don't get violent over people cursing at you and being disrespectful and stuff, okay? But that's how you address that situation. And just do it right when it happens. And, like, look, if they can't get past that part, if they're going to be all evasive and defensive over there, you're not going to get anywhere in the conversation. You've already identified them as a criminal, okay? So, like, it's a bunch of stupidity. If they try to have some excuse, like they're making violent threats because they have some excuse for rebellion, it's like, what is your excuse for rebellion? Do you think that you should be rebellious over any kind of disagreement? You think this disagreement is so like such a imminent danger, and like that you have to be rebellious over it? It's that great of an issue? Like, or are you a crazy person? So you just, that's the argument that needs to be had right away. Identify them as a criminal. Okay, just get it out of the way. Like, look, you're being intimidating. You're making threats. Okay, you're trying to be manipulative. You're trying to provoke people into fights. Okay, it's just obvious. So, I'm just going to identify you right here as a criminal. If you're going to be all evasive, over me trying to identify you as a criminal, if you're going to try to maintain your position as this like manipulative criminal without getting past, just obviously they're going to try to be evasive when you try to identify them as a criminal. Okay, they might sense what's happening. Okay, these people communicate about this stuff. They train. Okay, like they advise each other on how to be intimidating towards people. Okay, how to be this kind of criminal. So, it just happens a lot. So yeah, just really bring out the rebellious nature in these people. Okay, the violence. Okay, it's there, right? These riots don't just happen for no reason. Okay, these are like ideologies. Okay, they act like they have an excuse for rebellion, violent rebellion. So make that the forefront. Be like, look, are you some kind of rebel? All right. Do you think you have some kind of righteous cause that you're being rebellious against the nation over? Like, or are you some kind of savage and you're just trying to be rebellious because you're a savage? Are you trying to provoke people to try to get people into legal trouble? Like, are you really trying to be violent towards people? Why are you talking that way? What do you expect people to talk that way towards you? What makes you think you're justified in speaking that way? Okay, would you expect somebody else to speak to you that way even if they, were on the right side of the argument? So it's that kind of stupidity, all right? Get that out of the way, okay? Demand a respectful conversation. Be like, look, I'm not I'm not rebelling against the nation right now, okay? I'm not trying to incite violence, I'm not trying to incite crime, I'm not trying to manipulate, all right? What are you doing?